You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on iTunes and at facebook.com/DCAU Review. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 7 of the DCAU Review. I am your host, as always, Cal Renner, and with me, my good friend, brother, co-host, and all-around great guy, Liam Renner. Liam, we're on episode 7 already. Hard to believe it.
Yeah, we're just rolling right through these, and we've got an episode that is very special to me, and I know to you as well. But
yeah, absolutely.
we got a special one today. It doesn't feature a major villain. It does not feature necessarily like the greatest, most memorable plot.
Not a lot of Batman either.
Not a lot of Batman, and yet I would put this maybe in my top. I'll say my top 25 episodes.
Wow.
In all of the DCAU.
Whoa.
And maybe that'll change. You know, we can check on once we start rating and we start getting into some of the other shows. Maybe this will be proven false. But yeah, right now this is one of my very favorite episodes. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Cool. Yeah. Today's episode is going to be episode 8 in the chronological order of Batman the Animated Series, and that is The Forgotten. Which, Liam, this is an interesting episode, like you said. It's not a very Batman-heavy episode. It's not an episode that, actually, from what I saw, obviously last year was the 25th anniversary of Batman the Animated Series debuting on Fox, and saw a lot of people come out with a lot of top lists and ranking their animated episodes, which is actually the inspiration for this podcast. We figured we'd do one of our own, but in podcast form. But this episode tends to get poo-pooed a lot. A lot of people don't like this episode, and I'm really not sure why overall, because when we got down to it, it's an interesting episode. It deals with some real life stuff, like we talked about in a lot of the episodes that we've liked. It's not a straightforward good guy versus bad guy, super villain doing something crazy type story. But why do you think people poo-poo this so much?
I mean, I think it comes down to what we've already sort of mentioned in passing here. It's not much Batman. It doesn't have a big memorable villain. It's an episode that has something to say, and we can get into whether or not it says what it's trying to say as well as it could. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to me that this ends up so low on a lot of people's. This ends up in like the bottom 5 for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, to me, it's the overall atmosphere, the music, and some of the animation we'll get into. It's just, it really stands out to me. It's one of the episodes that I remembered most from just watching it when I was young, and it's one that still sticks in my mind now when I go back and watch. And so this is definitely a hard disagree, I think, from a lot of people that have gone back and looked at this stuff. But hey, that's kind of part of the fun.
That's right. We don't all have to like the same stuff.
Right. That's sort of the fun part about people are allowed to like the different things, and we always encourage any feedback. If you think we're dead wrong, maybe you thought The Underdwellers was great. I mean, you're wrong, but maybe you thought that. And if that's the case, we love getting feedback. That I've been tweeting with some people about it this week. Love hearing feedback on that. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of people maybe not like this, but this is sort of in our opinion, maybe a diamond in the rough or a hidden gem, perhaps.
Absolutely. So why don't we jump right ahead into our categories? We'll start scoring some things. Remind our lovely listeners at home what our 4 categories are.
So we have our 4 main categories, which are plot, animation, voice acting, and music. We also have a bonus category where we can award an extra point or two if something comes up that's maybe not covered in one of those main 4 ones, or if there's just something super special about the episode that you just want to add a little bonus on, you can do that as well. But so the main scoring will be blank out of 40, with each category going up to 10.
Cool. Awesome. So let's jump right into plot. We mentioned it a little bit. Not a lot of Batman in this episode. He's introduced very late into the episode. The plot itself starts out very interestingly because it's Bruce Wayne. It looks like he's volunteering at a homeless shelter of some sort and talking with this guy. And there's a disappearance of these these homeless people. These afterthoughts is kind of what the guy who runs the shelter talks, or transients. He kind of refers to them as people who are afterthoughts, or people don't care. General society doesn't care if homeless people disappear, which right off the bat, that's an interesting, deep, heavy thing. And as opposed to the way it worked in The Underdwellers, where it was uncomfortable to the point of, hey, listen, this is probably real life, but not something that should be tackled in a children's cartoon. This is interesting because it kind of gets you thinking. My issue with it, though, was that I felt like this episode didn't really know what direction it wanted to go into. It touches on this at the beginning, that the homeless are kind of afterthoughts. And then it's kind of a forgotten plot point until the very last scene. And even then, it's kind of treated like, oh, well, these two guys that Bruce meets while he's, in this, camp, for lack of a better word, like internment camp for homeless people that this villain is running, making them do this slave labor. Other than those two guys being reunited with the one guy being reunited with his family, the other guy getting a place to stay for a little bit till he's back on his feet, there's not really a happy ending for the rest of the community there. Bruce doesn't build a gigantic shelter to help these people.
Right.
He doesn't donate $1 billion to a certain shelter or something. He gets in his Rolls Royce and drives away. Actually, he doesn't even drive away. His butler drives him away. So I don't know what quite this episode was trying to say specifically. There were some good plot points, I thought. The scene where he has this vision, he's forgotten who he is, and it kind of comes back around to that homeless point where Bruce realizes in this dream sequence he doesn't know who he is, he has amnesia, and in this sequence he's Bruce Wayne, and there's a bunch of homeless people that walk up to him, and his first thing to do is he pulls out money and he hands it to the first person, but then he's overwhelmed by the amount of people that need his help. And then he starts to cry, and that was, man, that's super deep right there. But that's kind of where that subject ends. So I don't know. I gave the plot a 5 out of 10 just because I thought it was middle of the road. There were some things that they touched on that I felt like they could have gone a little bit deeper on. They could have made it a statement about that. They could have gone back to that at the end where, maybe Bruce... I don't know. Just throwing it out there. Bruce decides he's gonna volunteer at the homeless shelter every single weekend instead of being Batman. I don't know. There's just something that could have wrapped that up as a, hey, these are people that shouldn't be forgotten. These are people that are human beings too. These are people that matter to society, even if society in itself has cast them aside.
Yeah, that's kind of thing, and you mentioned it, the scene where he is handing out money, or in his vision or his dream is handing out money, and is sort of overwhelmed by the realization that he can't help everybody. And that's sort of a recurring theme. You'll see that in a lot of superhero comics, a lot of superhero properties of, that nobody can... Why did Superman save this train from derailing, but in the meantime, somebody's mom got shot on the other side of the world? It's like, why are these... It's a way of looking at nobody, no hero, no single man can save everyone, can make everything better. Not as Bruce Wayne with all the money he has. He can't solve that problem. Right. And as Batman, he can't stop every villain. He can't stop every injustice.
Right.
And sort of the ending of the episode being that he offers these two men that he worked with, Riley and Salvo, he offers them jobs and sort of drives away. And it is a happy ending for those two characters, for the characters we met. But as you mentioned, there's, dozens and dozens of guys sort of seen in the background working at this camp that I guess don't get jobs at Wayne Enterprises. So, it ends on sort of a happy ending where it's like, oh, okay, Bruce takes care of his friends. And that is nice, but it's presented as like this, okay, and the story is over. But it's like... In real life, that's the point where, the story's not over for the other 30 guys who are still, are back in the city, but still don't have a job.
Including that first real skinny guy that he throws in the box that we can only presume died. Who died in the hot box, because we don't see a rescue for him later on.
No, we do not. And so yeah, I went ahead and gave plot 4 out of 10.
Okay.
I like that they go into some themes like that. It is interesting, and it's something, but for a 22-minute episode, there's a lot of surface scratching. There's a lot of, we touch on this real quick, we touch on that, and then we got to move on because we got to have Batman fight the bad guys and wrap it all up in 22 minutes or whatever. So it's an interesting idea. They tried some stuff. It's certainly an experimental episode in that way.
Sure.
But yeah, as far as, like I said, a lot of interesting ideas that really don't get put to a full conclusion. So Absolutely. Yeah, I went 4 out of 10 on that.
4 out of 10. Okay. Cool. All right. Next spot we'll move on to is the animation. What do you think of the animation for the episode?
So it's really interesting because it's a little inconsistent.
Certainly.
There's some scenes in the middle of the episode when Bruce gets his memory back and he starts to escape the prison camp where he's running, and you pointed out a lot of this is in the daylight, and maybe they can sort of hide things a little better in shadows.
Certainly.
But there's some wonky animation, or a lot of maybe some not as much detail in people's faces, and
there's some real weird looking guys too, with like elongated, stretched out faces.
Yeah.
Too. Plastic Man looking characters.
Yeah, so it's, again, we talked about that a little bit, I think, in the Pretty Poison episode. It's just there's just a little lack of detail or a little inconsistency. But the highs that they reach when the animation is on point in this episode are really high. Mm-hmm. There's a part where Alfred is flying the bat plane looking for Bruce, and he's flying through this canyon, this desert area in Gotham City. No, not exactly sure where that is in relation to the rest of the major city. Right. But apparently there's a desert canyon that's several miles long. But there's some really nice shots of the bat plane sort of weaving through the canyons.
Yeah, and we pointed out this is before digital animation, where nowadays you can watch, whether it's in the Justice League episode where you see some scenes with the javelin flying, or if you watch Family Guy, there's some, you can tell when something's been digitally animated. Typically, it's when a vehicle or something is moving, and they're able to make it look 3-dimensional. This is pre-digital animation to age,
right.
So to be able to effectively make that plane look like it's not just a flat piece of, paper moving across the screen, to give it 3 dimensions, not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So they do a very good job with that. There's also sort of the second sort of dream sequence or vision that Bruce has when he does get his memory back. His memory is triggered by the word family, and so if the first flash is everything's a black background, and you see Thomas and Martha Wayne, and Thomas is throwing young Bruce into the air. Mm-hmm. And it's this very joyful, happy moment. And then you hear a bell sound, and all of a sudden, here comes the Wayne gravestone. And it just comes right at you on the screen, and the stone starts to crack and break up. And from the ashes of that, you see a building. It sweeps up to the top of the building where you see Batman. And it's time for Liam's Cape Movement Corner. Because you don't get much of it here, but there's a moment where the camera sweeps up, you see Batman, and you see that cape moving, and I gotta bring it up because it's so darn cool. Because that's part of what makes Batman who he is because he looks cool. If he didn't look cool, he wouldn't be as fun to talk about.
That's right.
Or something. But yeah, so you get this moment, and it's a very close-up on Batman's face, and then it fades back out to Bruce still trapped in this box, and his demeanor completely changed. He goes from sort of scared and surprised to he gets mad, and you see his demeanor change, and his voice drops into the Batman voice, and he's, "We're gonna get out of here," yeah. And it's really well done. So the highs of the animation, I think, outweigh the lows. Okay. So I went ahead and gave that a 7 out of 10 for this one.
All right.
What about you?
I gave it, so I ended up giving it a 5 out of 10 myself. I told you, I think we talked about it during Christmas with the Joker, that proportions, to me, a lot of times will take me out of an episode. If something doesn't look right, it's hard for me to focus on anything else. I don't know why that's such a trigger for me, but it's weird. And there's a lot of proportion issues in this. There's a really cool scene at the beginning of the episode where Bruce is getting into his disguise, his Gaff Morgan disguise, as it's labeled.
Is that the guy's name, you think?
I mean, I can't
his
imagine...
character's name?
I can't imagine what else it would be.
One's labeled Matches Malone,
right?
One's mentioned Smith from the Robin's Reckoning episode.
I think the Smith character is very similar to Gaff Morgan because they had a very similar wardrobe.
Same cream that makes the 5 o'clock shadow on his face.
Yeah, whatever that is. But it's a cool scene, but it was ruined for me because the very beginning of it, he reaches his arm into a closet and he's supposed to be taking the disguise out, and his arm is bigger than the suit bag that's supposed to be covering his clothes and stuff. It was just a weird inconsistency. There's a lot of inconsistency, cartoony looking characters, and like you mentioned, I think maybe if I were to give it an excuse, it would say there's a lot of daylight in this episode, there's a lot of twilight in this episode, so there's not as much shadow work, but I feel like there's a lot of detail lost, even in that very first scene with Bruce, with the guy that's running the homeless shelter. Bruce has a lot of detail in his face, and he looks, he looks like Bruce Wayne. And then he pan over to the other guy, and he looks like he was an afterthought, like he was added at the end.
Yeah, he looks sort of like a non-playable character in a video game. Like, especially now in sort of this golden age of video games, if you have a PS4 and you play, and the main characters of the games look great, and there's so much detail in their face. But especially if it's like an open world type game, you go into like the town and you talk to the merchant or whatever, right, in like Skyrim or something, and they have no detail in their face.
Right, because they're an afterthought.
Right, they look like a manic. Because it's like, okay, well, we spent our money and our time and our focus on making the character you're going to look at the most look good.
Right.
But this guy you're going to see for 2 seconds and then never think about again, we don't have to put as much detail into him. He also, I just thought of this, looks like he has gray hair, but he has like the comb over.
Yeah.
He reminds me a lot of the guy from Joker's Favor.
Oh.
Like, I think maybe they just color changed the guy from Joker's Favor. And now he's running a homeless shelter.
Could be. Very well could be. I can't wait to compare and contrast later on when we get to that episode. So the scenes that I did like that were animated, I thought were animated well. The headlamp scene, the scene where they go into the mine shaft and they shut down the lights. Oh, so cool.
Awesome.
Like, the closest thing we'll ever get to a full episode of Batman the Animated Series done in black and white. Like, just the color scheme, choosing to do that portion of the scene, it's in black and white. And that, if the whole episode had been done in black and white, maybe the animation for me gets an 8 or a 9. But that scene alone brought the score up. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 10. Just because I feel like it's middle of the road. The inconsistencies really took me out of it a lot. But there were certainly some good points, like we mentioned, the Batplane scene and the headlamp scene.
For sure.
All right. Moving right along, heading over to voice acting. So I gave voice acting for this episode a 7 out of 10, and not because there was anything in particular that I thought stood out, other than Alfred is good in this episode. # my Alfred. He's back, and he's really in a groove. He plays a major role in this episode, which I thought was a bit of a plot point. We didn't even talk about that, but Alfred, the way that he ends up finding Bruce is completely nonsensical. He stumbles. We have to go back and talk about this, because he tracks the car that Bruce initially drives as in disguise as the homeless guy. Bruce goes to this neighborhood down by the docks where he hears the homeless people are disappearing. He drives his expensive car down there, gets out of it, starts walking around, gets distracted by a cat of all things in the middle of a fight, and ends up getting knocked out and losing his memory. So Alfred ends up doing some detective work, which I thought was a cool way of fleshing out that character a little bit. He's not just... how did you put it?
As Robin puts it in a later episode, he's not just a nice guy who fixes Batman and Robin sandwiches.
Right, exactly. He's a three-dimensional character. We learn later on in the episode that he worked for some intelligence agency in the United Kingdom. Very interesting. So they're setting some of that up, that Alfred's not just a goofy butler. He's part of the Batman team. He's part of the Bat family.
Right.
But he stumbles across. He tracks the car to like a auto lot, and he happens to see the two guys that Bruce was fighting that knocked Bruce out. But he doesn't know that they're the guys that Bruce knocked out, and they don't know that was Bruce's car. Because you wouldn't assume that a homeless guy would be driving a really expensive car. So Alfred just happens to guess that these guys have something to do with this, place the tracker on it, and they drive straight out to wherever it is into the desert that Bruce is being capped. That whole plot hole was another thing for me.
Yeah, that's... And, like, it would have been one thing if if Alfred had gotten there, seen the car, and the thugs had been like messing with the car or something,
or even like attacking another homeless guy.
Yes, or if Alfred saw them pushing like another homeless guy into this truck that they drive away in.
Bruce was being dressed up as a homeless guy either, right?
No, I mean he might have known at the very least that this was a case Batman was investigating.
Sure, I don't know.
You could There's enough there where if you had done one or two things different, that probably would have changed things. But yes, Alfred finds this tracker on Bruce's car, happens to put it on this truck, and moves on.
We digress. That was just another plot hole that I thought of. But the voice acting, Alfred's great. I wanted to punch Salvo Smith in the face every time he opened his mouth. I know he was there for comic relief, and again, it's a children's cartoon, so you're trying to appeal to some comedy. In that, Lauren Dreyfus is his name. We found out that he's Richard Dreyfuss's brother, and that's pretty much the only thing he's famous for. But didn't like him. Thought he was annoying. So I ended up giving 7 out of 10. How about you?
Same. I also went 7 out of 10. As you mentioned,
I didn't mention Bruce, Batman at all. Batman is the best part of this episode. Very strong and steady. Kevin Conroy brings up the score for me to a 7 out of 10.
Absolutely. He's very good. Alfred, as you mentioned, a couple shout-outs I want to give. One you mentioned Salvo, who's sort of the wormy wisecracker of this crew of Bruce Wayne.
The combed hair version of Jonathan Crane, by the way.
That's true, yes. Design-wise, he looks exactly like the original Batman animated series, Jonathan Crane design.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Same nose, same hair color, like it's
choice.
Pretty funny. But so he's Salvo's sort of the Rob Schneider character in this episode, which is maybe the meanest thing I've ever said about anybody.
Not a compliment, right?
And so he's a little annoying, and you're kind of rooting for him to get thrown into the hot box or whatever. But on the other hand, we have Dorian Harewood as Dan Riley, who's really does in addition to Kevin Conroy's great work, really provides a lot of the emotional resonance for this episode of this guy who wasn't homeless, who was just working at a homeless shelter.
He was a volunteer,
and he's having trouble he's been there for so long, he's having trouble remembering how old his son is, and he's trying to remember his birthday, and he starts to lose it in this hot box, and he in turn screaming about his family, again sort of a Deus Ex Machina plot device, but his performance is very good, and he's screaming for his family, which then triggers this Batman's memory to come back, and we're off to the races. But Dorian Harewood, who people might remember voiced...
So during the whole episode, I was like, man, this guy's voice sounds familiar. Thankfully, IMDb reminded us.
Yes, he voiced War Machine in the second season of the Iron Man cartoon.
Yep.
People may remember the first season, Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air voiced War Machine.
Did not know that until you brought that up.
But yes, in the second season, Dorian voiced him. Also voiced Ron Troop on Superman, and has done a good amount of voice acting work over the years. But
his most memorable role, of course,
his most memorable role was as Taft, a parody of Shaft in an episode of The Tick, where the Tick has a mental breakdown while he's fighting an ant villain, and he goes to see a therapist, and the therapist, I think, is just a head in a jar.
It is.
And one of the ways the therapist is trying to break the Tick of his fear is to have a giant African-American man wrestle the Tick in various outfits, one of which Taft dresses up as the Tick's mother and begins wrestling him. So yes, Dorian Harewood as Taft, and to a much lesser extent as Wolverine. I mean, as War Machine and Dan Riley here in this episode. But yes, of Taft fame.
I think this has inspired me to at least to consider exploring doing a Tick podcast.
Yeah, I think we got
at least an episode or two of doing an animated, maybe an Elseworlds episode of Tick.
Yes,
the Tick podcast.
We might have to do that at some point.
That episode is so great. If you haven't seen that episode, I don't know. We should get the name of it. The Tick versus something.
I think it's the Ant People. Maybe the Tick versus the Ant People or something.
I'll find it out before the end of the episode. But what was your final score for voice acting?
I went 7 out of 10 again. Also, we had George Murdoch as the villain, playing Boss Biggest again, very much as we mentioned in The Underdwellers. The name we must not speak. Very much a Saturday morning cartoon. He's a big fat guy, hence the name Biggest. Get it?
I see what you did there.
He's very cartoonish. He's big fat guy who's always eating, and he's I can't stand lazy people, because ha ha ha. But it works. It works for what they're going for, and sort of him being the warden or whatever of this prison that they've set up. And just on last minor note, Richard Mall, who we'll get to very soon, we'll be talking about the Two-Face two-parter, and who we've talked about in passing in previous episode. Should be mentioned, he's the voice of Two-Face and Harvey Dent. He's also the voice of the Bat Computer, sort of the robotic computer voice. And he and Alfred basically have an argument in this episode where Alfred's demanding that the plane, which I guess is on autopilot, land, and Richard Mall says "your funeral," and then zooms down in a very dramatic fashion, then tells Alfred to watch his step as he's falling out of the bat plane.
It's so good.
So really, extra props to Richard Mall for pulling double duty as both one of the great villains of this series and sort of an unsung role as the Bat Computer, as he shows up in quite a few episodes.
By the way, that Tick episode is Ants and Pants. That's it.
That's right.
The episode.
Yes.
Ants and Pants.
Ants and Pants. It's great. But
yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm just so distracted thinking about Taft. All right. Moving on. Final category. Wrapping it up here. We got music, Liam. I think we saved the best for last. I think we could talk about, as much as we talked about in The Last Laugh, the power of the music as a plot device in that episode. It's not as heavy in this episode, but when it's relied upon as a plot device, boy, does it come through.
Absolutely. I gave music 10 out of 10. It's great, man. And it to me, every scene, as we mentioned at the start of the episode, Batman or Bruce Wayne is undercover and he's walking through sort of a seedier area of Gotham, and there's a very low, there's strings there, and it's very low and it's ominous. And then sort of as the action picks up, it sort of swings into higher gear, and the scenes in the prison camp, there's this incredible harmonica piece that plays. It's just fantastic. So yeah, I gave it 10 out of 10, and actually I wanted to give it an 11 out of 10, but since that's not possible, I went ahead. That's my first ever bonus point, as I'm just giving an extra point to the music in the bonus category, because that's how great the music is here, as it's so effective at making you feel what the scene that's going on is trying to make you feel. The music that plays is very sorrowful. When we mentioned the scene where Bruce is handing out money to the homeless people and then is overwhelmed, it's the music plays there. The same thing with the music playing when the Wayne gravestone flashes, and then when Batman finally appears, the sort of the more traditional Shirley Walker Batman theme plays. And it's just, and they meld them. We mentioned that again in Last Laugh, how the theme of the episode also melding into the Batman theme and the Joker theme in that episode, sort of melding those two pieces of music together, and sort of, you talk about a harmony there. Yeah. It's great, man. I can't say enough good stuff about this. Yeah, and we'll play some of the music here in the background so that you can hear it. But just the heavy reliance on the harmonica, that gives you, that sun-beaten southwestern type feel, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it properly in words, but you're spot on. This is the first one I think we've ever both given a perfect score to. I'm giving it a 10 out of 10 also. Awesome. The transitions, like I said, they didn't rely, as opposed to The Last Laugh, where they relied on that same theme over and over and over and over again, which is, in my opinion, the best soundtrack to an episode. This episode does a great job of, it introduces it in the title card, gives you the harmonica and a little bit of guitar, or whatever it is that starts off there, plucking on a guitar string, and then it
kind of throughout the episode, depending on the plot point needed, like you mentioned when we were talking about this before we are off air, the episode, the part of the episode where he's being investigative, he's put his disguise on, he's trying to figure out what's happening to the homeless people of Gotham. It's very suspenseful. What's coming up next? Something's going to happen, but we don't know what it's going to be. And then that music comes back in later when he's in the dream sequence and he's lost his memory and he doesn't know who he is. The music that ends up kind of crescendoing in that dream sequence after there's a Joker point in the dream sequence where they fall off of something and he meets the homeless people. That crescendos into just a goosebump giving piece. It's just fantastic. And then later on in the episode, they transfer back to the harmonica. Then in the mine shaft, it's more of your traditional orchestral type music. And then they bring the harmonica back in a little bit at the end. It's good. It's fantastic. So this is a case where the music does a lot to advance the plot, the feeling of maybe not the plot, but the feeling of the episode. It's a good callback because I think we both have the nostalgia bit, a little bit of thinking about that and remembering that from when we watched it when we were younger.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, even now we can appreciate it because it's good music.
Absolutely. I've pulled up this piece. There's you can find the individual tracks. They have released them on iTunes, and I think I'm sure you can find them on YouTube as well. And yeah, it's worth it just to listen to this episode's soundtrack because it builds and ebbs and flows. And the best compliment I can give it is that the emotion they're trying to get you to feel when that theme plays is exactly what I felt.
Absolutely.
In every the sorrowful moments when you see the Wayne grave, or when you see him going through the Hall of Mirrors and the laughing Bruce Wayne turns into the Joker, and there's sort of a crescendo at that point, and the music really swells. It's everything. It's it's whether they want you to feel a little uneasy, or they want you to feel scared, or they want you to feel sad, or when it's time to be a little more triumphant when Batman shows up at the end to fight, to put a stop to it all.
Absolutely.
It works every time, and it works as well as it possibly could, which
absolutely
that's why you got 2 10s in this one.
Yeah, there's certainly a good reason for that. All right, so we ended up, my final score, totaling everything up, I gave this a 27 out of 40.
Yeah, and my final was 29 out of 40. So one
extra bonus point there took it up another notch.
Yeah, so one of the higher ranked episodes we've had so far, I think, for both of us. And it's great fun, and it's again one of those episodes, like we mentioned, the plot leaves a lot to be desired in some ways. It raises questions and maybe doesn't do the best job of answering those questions once they're raised, but as a whole package, I love this episode, man, and I'll go back and watch this one 100 times.
Yeah.
I love it. I can't say enough good stuff about it.
I agree with you completely. All right. With that, we'll start wrapping things up. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like us, we would love for you to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That helps us out immensely. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at DCAU Review. Some great content, interactive stuff that we've been posting on there. Some updates. Lets you know almost the minute when new episodes are posted and streaming. So check that out. And then don't forget to like our Facebook page, facebook.com/DCAU Review. With that, I'm Callum.
And I'm Liam.
And we will catch you on next week's episode.
Bye-bye.